Now, many cultures have actually emulated this ancient biblical practice of the cities of refuge. In fact, I was just in Hawaii, and in Hawaii they have these areas where there were cities of refuge. And it's in Greece, in ancient Greece, they had cities of refuge. But in medieval times, there were cities of refuge. We sometimes hear the word sanctuary, like this area you can go and be safe. All of this comes from the ancient biblical practice of the cities of refuge as established by Moses. And I'm going to talk about those things, but the reason is because you're going to actually see why it matters here in this ending of 2 Samuel chapter 3. You'll miss it if you're not aware of the culture, though. So I am going to read it, but I want to remind you a little bit of where we were, because Ishbosheth and Abner. Ishbosheth is a son of Saul, probably one that wasn't recognized in his lifetime, so probably one from a concubine or something. But Ishbosheth is a son of Saul, and Abner is the general, but he's really the one in power. And Abner is now turning on Ishbosheth because Ishbosheth accused Abner of something. He said, you had relationships with one of my father's concubines, which is like, that's not your property. And Abner's like, what am I, a dog? I didn't do that. And then he's like, you know what? I'm going to go to David because the Lord has promised David this kingdom. Now I'm going to make sure it's delivered into his name. So it took Abner being slighted to do the right thing, but he is doing the right thing, and he's going to David. They are making this agreement that they would unite the kingdom. I need you to remind you that Abner was running away in one of the battles, and a guy named Asahel was chasing him. And Abner's like, hey, don't chase me. Go take somebody else, right? You don't need me. You just go take somebody else's armor. But Asahel wanted to make a name for himself by taking out the commander of Israel, Abner. But Abner, when he finally realized that Asahel was not going to give up, he takes the butt end of his spear and jabs it into his stomach, but it goes all the way through. And he dies. Asahel was Joab's brother. And Joab is the commander of David's army. And when you killed a person in the Old Testament, you could go and get blood revenge. You would be able to go and without penalty kill the person who killed your brother or your sister or someone in your family. And the only time you couldn't do that is if that person made it to a city of refuge. The cities of refuge were strategically placed that pretty much no matter where you were in ancient Israel, you could get there in a day's time. And it applied to what we now call, and the Bible will translate it this way, is manslaughter. Now, manslaughter is not murder. Manslaughter is when you maybe accidentally killed somebody. And you would go to a city of refuge and you would sort of present your case and say, look, this is what happened. For Abner, it was really more self-defense, and he didn't use the sharp end of his spear, if you remember. He used the butt of his spear, but that must have been at least sharp enough, or he's strong enough to where it went through his stomach, and he died. So in other words, this is not premeditated murder. Maybe this is manslaughter. So you could go present your case to a city of refuge. You would still have to stand trial, but that person couldn't kill you without trial. That couldn't happen because you made it to a city of refuge. So Joab, if Abner is not in a city of refuge, he could avenge his brother Asahel and kill him. That's how it works. So let me read the end of chapter 3, starting at verse 20, and then we'll walk through this together. All right. When Abner, accompanied by 20 men, came to David in Hebron, David prepared a banquet for Abner and the men who were with him. Abner said to David, "Let me leave, so that I may go and gather all Israel to my lord the king, so that they may make an agreement with you. Then you will rule over all that you desire." So David sent Abner away, and he left in peace. I'm going to skip somewhere. I'm going to finish reading that, but I'm going to just read Joshua 20, verse 7 for you. This is the selection of the cities of refuge. So they selected Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. So they're in a city of refuge. You'll notice that they're in Hebron. And David makes an agreement with Abner and then sends him away. All right. Now David's soldiers and Joab were coming back from a raid, bringing a great deal of plunder with them. Abner was no longer with David in Hebron, for David had sent him away, and he had left in peace. When Joab and all the army that was with him arrived, Joab was told, "Abner, the son of Ner, came to the king. He sent him away, and he left in peace." So Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Abner has come to you. Why would you send him away? Now he's gone on his way. You know Abner, the son of Ner. Surely he came here to spy on you and to determine when you leave and when you return and to discover everything that you're doing." Joab says, "I don't trust Abner. He's spying for Ishbosheth. He's not making an agreement. This is all a lie." Then Joab left David, sent messengers after Abner. They brought him back from the well of Sirah, but David was not aware of it. When Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside at the gate as if to speak privately with him. Joab then stabbed him in the abdomen and killed him, avenging the shed blood of his brother Asahel. When David later heard about this, he said, "I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord of the shed blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood whirl over the head of Joab and the entire house of his father. May the males of Joab's house never cease to have someone with a running sore or a skin disease, or one who works at the spindle, or one who falls by the sword, or one who lacks food." So Joab and his brother Abishai killed Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in Gibeon during the battle. David instructed Joab and all the people who were with him, "Tear your clothes, put on sackcloth, lament before Abner." Now King David followed behind the funeral pallet, so they buried Abner in Hebron. The king cried loudly over Abner's grave, and all the people wept too. The king chanted the following lament for Abner: "Should Abner have died like a fool? Your hands were not bound, and your feet were not put into irons. You fell the way one falls before criminals." All the people wept over him again. Then all the people came and encouraged David to eat food while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, "God will punish me severely if I taste bread or anything whatsoever before the sun sets." All the people noticed this, and it pleased them. In fact, everything the king did pleased all the people. All the people in all Israel realized on that day that the killing of Abner, son of Ner, was not done at the king's instigation. Then the king said to his servants, "Do you not realize that a great leader has fallen this day in Israel? Today I am weak, even though I am anointed as king. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too much for me to bear. May the Lord punish appropriately the one who has done this evil thing." So, and you'll notice that David, he's king, so he could just go and say, "That's it, Joab, because of what you did, you're going to be sentenced to death." But technically, because he brought him, he's like, "Hey, I want to tell you something," brings him to the gate. So they go right outside Hebron. just gets him right outside the city gates and stabs him. Because now you're no longer in the city of refuge. And so, yes, he avenged the blood, but it was through manipulation. This was somebody who was safe and was there at the behest of the king, and then you manipulated him outside of the gates, just far enough to where now Joab could kill Abner and not be breaking the Mosaic law. Now, the picture I want to paint for you is really cool when it comes to the city of refuge. I'm gonna walk there slowly, but the first point I'm going to make is that we too have an enemy that wants us outside the city of refuge. Now, as Christians, our only refuge is Jesus. And I was actually really bothered recently. I was listening to some newscasts, and they were talking about how the Pope recently met with some Muslim leaders. Now, I'm not up here to endorse the Pope in any way. However, what I do recognize is that there are millions of people who hear what the Pope says and they listen to it. And there are millions of people who are not Christian who thinks that this is the representation of what Christianity is. And what was said was that all religions have a place in our society, and all of them have a purpose. Now, there are many, many, many ways to the wrong destination. But there is only one way to the right destination. And the Bible teaches us very clearly that Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And we live presently in a society where the idea of loving people is just to tolerate wrong decisions. Never, as a father, would I let my son play in the road because I don't want to offend him. That would be like, hey, I know you're running in the freeway and all, and you do you. That is so irresponsible for me to do something like that. And so if I do see people who are making wrong decisions, heading down the wrong way, I want to stop it. I've used this example where it's like you about to walk into a door that leads to beauty, everything that is beautiful, everything that is good, everything that is awesome, because all perfect things come from the Father in heaven. And to be separated from the Father is to be separated from everything that is good. And so you're about to open this door, and then you see somebody opening a door which you see beyond. You see it is full of everything that is not good, everything that is not from the Father. It's terrible and it's no good. And they're going to walk into this door, and if you just go, ooh, that's no good for them, and you just walk in your door, I can think of few things that are more unloving than that. To just abandon somebody to a terrible wrong decision. I would want to say, hey, whoa, don't go in there. That is not a good way to go. My silence must never be confused for love. That is quite the opposite. I don't want you in there. It's not good. I want you in here. And I'm going to read for you just some quotes. One of them was when I was in ministry. I took a youth class for youth ministry, and someone had me read a book. It's by Brian McLaren, and it's called A New Kind of Youth Ministry. And the other is from a very popular person named Glennon Doyle. Now, this is what theologians have called from what we call progressive Christianity. Some have called it the emergent church. But there's different words, but it's the same thing. It's a very progressive thing, and it is people who rejoice in the idea that the Bible doesn't always get it right. They think, well, the Bible's wrong here, and they go, thank goodness. Now I don't have to change my life. And I'm going to read for you, I'm going to tell you the story, because back in the day when there were things called mommy bloggers, where you would actually write things out and people would read it with their eyes and things. I know if you're young, that's hard. You don't just listen to it, and it's not just a 60-second video that you go, oh, right? I do think that kids are smoothing out their brain with some of the TikTok things. They call it TikTok brain, real phenomenon if you want to know. But mommy bloggers was a real popular one. Her name was Glennon Doyle. And then she ended up writing a book because she found out that her husband for a few years was unfaithful to her. And she said, you know what? I am committed to fighting for my marriage. And she fought for her marriage, and she wrote this book about how to process and work through this infidelity that happened in her marriage. And then one day, she's at a book signing of this book about fighting for her marriage, and she sees this professional soccer player who's a woman. And she thinks, wow, I am very infatuated with that woman. And then she decides that she is going to leave her husband and go and be in this lesbian relationship with this woman. And so for me, it's sort of a radical, like, you're at a book signing for about how you're fighting for your marriage with your spouse, and then you leave your spouse and leave your kids to go and be in a lesbian relationship with this woman. But she writes this. She says she doesn't abandon her Christianity. She manipulates it. And this is what she writes to her audience as fellow Christians. Maybe you'll see what's wrong with it. She says this, maybe Eve was never meant to be our warning. Maybe she was meant to be our model. Own your wanting. Eat the apple. Let it burn. Let me read that again to you. Right? But by the way, don't take this out of context. I'm not endorsing this statement. Okay. Maybe Eve was never meant to be our warning. Maybe she was meant to be our model. Own your wanting. Eat the apple. Let it burn. Brian McLaren, in a book I read for youth ministry, he said this, the Bible is a book of stories written by people who are trying to make sense of their experiences with God. Okay. Our experiences today are just as valid and need to be taken seriously. Okay. The Bible is not the ultimate authority. Our lived experience is. In other words, if the Bible is ever in contradiction with how you're feeling, go with how you're feeling. So this woman is saying, I really want this. Therefore, the Bible must be wrong about it. You very quickly changed from Jesus Christ being Lord of your life to you being Lord of your life. Now, for me, they might not even see it, but they were just dragged enough outside the walls of refuge. The devil wants you outside the walls. And if the devil can get you to desire what you want more than you desire what Christ wants for you, that's when you're going to fall. When we look at the person of Jesus as an example for us, I love that during his temptation account, so in Matthew chapter 4, of course, he's fasted for 40 days. He's going to be completely lethargic, and at that point, he's probably in a state of starvation, and the devil says, hey, make this stone into bread. And Jesus, of course, would want bread. That's why for you, you're like, that's not a temptation to me because you can't just grab a stone and make it bread. See, but temptation is ability and desire. Ability and desire. It's not a temptation if you don't actually have the ability to do it. I can't tempt any of you to fly just right now by flapping your arms because you have no ability to do it. So Jesus has the ability and he has the desire. That's what a temptation is. He would want bread. But he says, man does not live on bread alone. And then Satan quotes the Bible to him and he says, hey, the angels will catch you if you jump off this high place. Do not put the Lord your God to the test. He's quoting Deuteronomy, Jesus says. And then he brings before Jesus all the kingdoms of the earth and he says, I will give you these if you just bow to me. Think about that. If that is a temptation, there's ability and desire. Jesus came to save the kingdoms of the earth, and now Satan is offering them to him, but it's not the right way. And so Jesus says no. Later, when Jesus is at the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, not my will, but yours, God. Now, Jesus, in his incarnation, in his humanness, he knows what it is to have desires that are not in a line with God's. He knows what it feels like, but he never gave into it. Jesus has never sinned. He always put the will of the Father. I know everyone in this room knows what it is to have desires that are in competition. For instance, there are times where I don't want to do any chores. I want to go home and lay on my stomach. And my wife's like, can you help? And I'm like, I don't want to. Like, of course I don't want to. Or when kids are in a classroom and they say something so ridiculous that what I want to say back is not good. So I don't, right? Because I also want to be a good role model. I need to want something more than I want the wrong things, right? And so we need a desire. Now, if you make you the Lord of your life, then you're going to be thinking like Glennon Doyle and say, maybe Eve is the role model. How ridiculous. How dangerous. Jesus must be our only refuge. So Joab, though, he does have some reasons here. And maybe, I don't think a lot of you can relate entirely to it because you probably haven't had somebody, go and kill your brother in war. But we can relate in a sense to it. Because Joab feared Abner as a deceiver. That's fair, as a double agent. I think all of us sometimes can question the motivations of people. Like, why are they really doing that? Why are they saying that? I question their motivations. And that's, he's there to protect the king. So Joab, all of a sudden, the enemy general is meeting with David privately and discussing how they're going to get together. And Joab's like, I'm not sure I buy that. And then, of course, he's probably already set against Abner because Abner killed his brother. And so you already don't like this guy. And it is really, really, really easy to assume the worst in people you don't like. When people do things and you already don't like them, then you're all of a sudden going to question all of their motivations and you're already sort of set against them. So I've actually done this in class before when I'm teaching apologetics. There's a thing called poisoning the well. And some people don't realize it happens because it can be so subtle. But you tell them certain assumptions so that when somebody comes in the room, all of a sudden they have it. I'll say something like, hey, guys, just so you know, when so-and-so, I'll use Levi as an example. This isn't true, but I'll say, hey, when Levi comes back in the room, his stomach is really bothering him. And so every time he laughs, it's kind of I don't know if you know this, but when Levi laughs, it's because he's actually trying to hold the contents of his stomach in. He's got a really bad problem. And for whatever reason, when he laughs, it's this way of sort of tightening everything, right? And preventing him from having an accident. So don't make it weird for him, okay? Right? And so now when Levi comes in there, of course this isn't true, and he laughs, everyone's looking at each other like, oh no, he's having a go of it, right? It's not true, but I've poisoned the well. I've given them assumptions about this person, so now they're reading into every time he laughs. Every time he laughs, they're thinking, oh gosh, I hope I'm not around for an accident. Like, hey, you okay? He's like, yeah, why? That's funny. And they're, oh, right? But when we are letting the sort of bitterness or behaviors of things poison the well of our lives, and all of a sudden it is painting how we interpret everything else in that person's life. And if we want to be people of love, we have to work towards having their best interests in mind. We have to weigh the assumptions that we have about people and make sure they're not preventing us from actually leaning into forgiveness and reconciliation. The other one is that jealousy. Think about this. If Abner is coming in here and they're uniting the empire, there's Israel and Judah, and if they unite all together, then there's two cooks in the kitchen. Abner is the general of Israel, and Joab is David's army, and he might be afraid, like, oh no, you're taking my job. Like my jealousy 100% affects sometimes how I see things. I have this, of course I have this. Just I said this last year, but there's a wonderful teacher here at the school. He taught 6th grade Bible. His name's Jaron Connors. He's great. He was new. And they sat me down last year and they said, hey, how do you feel about us kind of freeing up your schedule a little bit so that you can work on, maybe counseling and mentoring kids more? And we'll take some of your middle school Bible classes away and we'll give it to him. Immediately, I already knew. There was like, jealousy. It was all just like, well, wait a minute, that's mine. That giving up and giving things to somebody else, it does. There's this sense of jealousy that then can poison the well, can make me now have a sort of bitterness or just being uncomfortable. In order to have the best interests of people in mind, we also must understand when we have to become less so others can become more. There is a stepping back so others can step up. There's no empowering people unless there's power to give people. And so if I want to empower, let's say, Jerry to do youth ministry, that means I can't be the one doing everything. If I want to empower Levi to step up in the back, that means I can't do it all. We have to be willing to become less if that's what is needed. I think all of us sometimes can have jealousy. When my son was going to be born, he was the only grandchild at the time, and grandma's wondering about time with him, right? All of a sudden, there's like they never said this, but I know it was true. I want to be the favorite grandma, right? I want to be the favorite grandma. I want to be the one where the kids begging to go over to their house. And that's why grandmas give out so many treats. So like, I don't have to be a parent anymore, so I just gave him 2 king-size candy bars. I'm like, what? He's 2, right? But there's a sense at which like you do want this, and maybe you get jealous of other people who are getting a certain amount of attention that you don't get. But can you see how that can poison the well for your ability to effectively and meaningfully love other people? So for Joab, there was no room in his heart for reconciliation and forgiveness. He did not want this to go to a trial, and ultimately, because if it did, Abner would not have been convicted. It was, of course, self-defense in battle, and he wasn't necessarily even trying to kill him. He would not, at trial, been convicted. And so instead, Joab sneaks him outside of the gates in order to kill him. He manipulated him outside the gates. Now, there is an interesting phenomenon, and this is where I think there's a really cool parallel for us. One, I want you to know that Jesus is our only refuge. And I have no problem telling you that those other faiths, those other religions are not having the refuge of Jesus. They're outside the walls. I'm not going to, there's nothing in me that is going to try to just get every single person to love me that I'm willing to compromise my ideals and my faith. We have to be willing to say that if you are not embracing Jesus, then you are not receiving the salvation that I want you to have. Because if you believe that there are all these different ways to heaven, then you really have no motivation to go and reach people that need the only way of Jesus. So one, they're outside the walls, but there's this really cool thing that the high priest, when you are in a city of refuge, when the high priest dies, anybody who was in that city of refuge and was staying there in order to be safe is now set free. All of your supposed issues, the blood oath against you is gone. And now you're free and you can go back to your home city. And so, for instance, if Abner was staying in Hebron, the city of refuge, and he stays until the high priest dies, then he's free. And he can go back to his home city. I say this because we might not realize this, but the Bible is using this illustration because Jesus, in the book of Hebrews, chapter 4, verse 14, calls Jesus our high priest. And so when we're in the cities of refuge, who died for us? Our high priest died so that now we are set free. There is this huge biblical narrative. So for a Jew, recognizing that Jesus is our high priest, and by his death, then we are set free. Everything that we had that was wrong, our sin, as we enter the city of refuge, because of the death of Jesus Christ, we are set free. But there are people. There is a real enemy who wants us outside the gate. I want to read for you. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 19 through 21. This is Paul who's he's actually talking about the other faiths outside of Christianity. He says, am I saying that idols or food sacrificed to them amount to anything? No. I mean that what the pagans sacrifice is to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be partners with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot take part in the table of the Lord and the table of demons. In other words, Paul isn't just saying like, hey, those people are getting it wrong. He's saying that under the very surface of what they're doing is a demonic presence. That there is a real force out there that wants you to be doing the wrong things, that wants you to be sacrificing to the wrong entities, that want you outside the cities, because if you're not following Jesus, you're lost. 1 John 5:19 says, we know that we are from God, and the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. That this idea that right now there are people who are taken captive by the evil one. I mean, it's really instructive to recognize that when Satan says, take these kingdoms, Jesus didn't say they're not yours. The power of sin right now makes Satan think he has claim on your life. And so Jesus is our only refuge from that claim. It says this in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1 through 5, very familiar. And although you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you formerly lived according to this world's present path, according to the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the ruler of the spirit that is now energizing the sons of disobedience, among whom all of us also formerly lived out our lives in the cravings of our flesh, indulging the desires of the flesh and the wind, and were by nature children of wrath, even as the rest. But God, being rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us, even though we were dead in transgressions, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you are saved. See, there, outside the cities of refuge, there is a ruler. And that ruler wants you to fail. But Jesus is our only refuge. I'll read that Hebrews 4:14, where it says, "Therefore, since we have great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession." Jesus is our high priest, and through his death we are set free from our transgressions. Just to give you the biblical passages for that city of refuge, it says this in Numbers 35, 26 through 28. "If the slayer at any time goes outside the boundary of the town to which he had fled, and the avenger of blood finds him outside the borders of the town of the refuge, and the avenger of blood kills the slayer, he will not be guilty of blood, because the slayer should have stayed in his town of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the slayer may return to the land of his possessions." You see that? He should have stayed in that place of refuge. So Abner should have stayed. He only went outside of it just a little bit, but it was enough. It was enough to where Joab could kill Abner and not be guilty of murder. We have lots of examples of this idea. In fact, the famous book Quasimodo uses this illustration of sanctuary. If you don't know the story of Quasimodo, he's got this hunchback. He's the hunchback of Notre Dame. And when he was a kid, he was so deformed that he got switched at birth with a girl named Esmeralda. And she actually lives there. And a guy named Frollo, he's the archdeacon of a church, goes and takes him. Because at the time, and this is actually true, kids who were orphans would be put out, kind of like when you go to a store and people have a box of like dogs. And I don't know, that used to happen when I was a kid. I'd go to there and there'd be someone outside the store and they'd have a box of puppies and be like, "Hey, you can take one for free." They did that, but with children. And there's Quasimodo. You look at him and he's described in a very grotesque way, so nobody wanted him. But Frollo, the archdeacon, he takes him and he puts him in the bell tower of the Church of Notre Dame. Well, Frollo, who is that archdeacon, when he's a bit older, he sees Esmeralda and desires her. This is not healthy or good. And he says, "Quasimodo, I want you to go and kidnap this girl for me." Quasimodo does none the wiser. He goes and he kidnaps this girl, but he gets caught and stopped by this guy named Phoebus, Captain Phoebus, who kind of likes Esmeralda. He gets imprisoned, and then he gets whipped in front of everybody, and he has to go on display in front of everybody. He's crying out, "Help me, save me," and Frollo ignores him because he doesn't want anyone to find out. Meanwhile, Frollo tries to kill Esmeralda, and then Quasimodo saves her, brings her up to the clock tower, and he yells the famous words, "Sanctuary, sanctuary," because you can't go in there. And for a while, this idea of sanctuary, it has been in medieval times for churches. You could go and you could receive sanctuary so long as you never went outside that church or you never went out there. You know, to a degree. And now I don't think that, like, hey, if somebody who just murdered somebody runs in here, we'd be like, "Hey, you're safe now." But that's not how that's going to work. However, what we do need to be teaching people is that this is sanctuary, in the sense that this is a place where you can find the salvation for your very soul. And the refuge you need is not from the consequences of your behavior, but from the consequences of your very sin. Okay? You might have to go to jail, you might have to experience those things, but what Jesus is in the business of saving souls. And if we only focus on the physical and not the spiritual, then we do a tremendous disservice to what Jesus came to save us from. It's exactly what happened with the people in Israel. They were hoping Jesus would come and save them from Rome. And when they realized that he wasn't, they mocked him and jeered him and spit at him, and they were happy when he was crucified because the Messiah was supposed to save them from their earthly problems. And Jesus did not come to save you from your earthly problems, but to make all of them worth it. Jesus came not to save you from that bill that you have coming up. He didn't come to save you maybe even from that physical ailment that you have. He has come to make all those things worth it, to save your very soul. And this idea of refuge is important because I cannot stress it enough. We do live in a culture where there is a huge movement, even within some, like I said, in progressive Christianity, there is a movement to try to get you outside the walls of refuge. There is a movement to get well-meaning Christians who want to follow Jesus to believe in things that are the whispers like Abner. The whispers of Joab to Abner, of, hey, come. Just let me get you outside the gate. Even a little. And there's death outside that gate, I promise you. There is death outside the gate of Jesus. Let me give you some examples here. In Deuteronomy 19:3, you shall build a roadway and divide into thirds the whole extent of your land that the Lord your God is providing as your inheritance. Anyone who kills another person should flee to the closest of these cities. But notice how it says you need to build roadways to it. You need to make the path towards refuge easier for other people. I think this is such a cool illustration because God did not just provide a city of refuge for people. He said you also need to make it easier for other people to get there. Build roadways towards refuge. Well, how do we do that? Romans 10:13-15 says, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How are they to call on one they have not believed in? And how are they to believe in one they have not heard of? And how are they to hear without someone preaching to them? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how timely is the arrival of those who proclaim the good news. We know that Jesus is our only refuge. Are we building roadways to his kingdom? Matthew 7:13-14, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and few find it. As Christian believers, we need to be building roadways to the refuge of Jesus. I want to really briefly tell you about Graham Staines. He died in 1999, born in 1941, but he did a ministry in India for people with leprosy. Now, if you don't know, of course, Mother Teresa in Calcutta did some work with people with leprosy. But in India, they have a caste system. Even though it's right now officially illegal, it's still practiced. But there are people who are untouchables. And if you have skin disease, you're untouchable. And he had a great ministry to people with leprosy. And he served the people of India. He fully assimilated. He learned the language. He learned the culture and the entire, and he boldly proclaimed Jesus in that area, and he was well loved in his community. And when he was at a jungle camp with his sons, he had a son named Timothy, who was 10, and a son named Philip, who was 6 years old. And they just went to a jungle camp, and they were sleeping in their van outside the city of Odisha. And some Hindu nationalists came and were mad, thinking he was forcing people to become Christian. So they surrounded it, and they lit the whole car on fire, killing him and his 2 sons. Can you imagine the wife, the mother, finding out that generations were gone? But I want to read you what she said, because what she said is a roadway. She paved it, and it was costly. She said, her name is Gladys, by the way. She said this: "I have forgiven those who killed my husband and my children. I hold no bitterness because forgiveness brings healing, and our land needs healing from hatred and violence." After this, the death of Graham and Timothy and Philip, there was a huge resurgence of missionary work in that area. It is radical that through the death of these people, both young and old, is what ultimately brought more people out willing to build roadways to Jesus. Now, I say this because you need to know that building roadways can cost you something. Maybe you have to overcome fear and doubt in yourself. Sometimes the thing that prevents us from speaking to somebody next to us is the doubt that we'll have the next words to say. Maybe we just fear being embarrassed. There is a difficulty there, but we have to recognize that there are people who have laid down their lives to build roadways to the refuge of Jesus. We are all builders contributing to a road. Whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not, we are laying down brick by brick through the patterns of our life a road to somewhere or to someone. And the question you ought to have is, where does your roadway lead? As it says in Matthew, some are building a wide road, a wide gate that leads to destruction. We have to be building on the narrow road because people need the refuge of Jesus. And it's not just in how you live. It is in the things that you're willing to say in the lives of people. We believe in a faith that is not silent. So let's not be silent to those who need to hear it. Amen. Lord Jesus, I pray that we would build roadways towards your refuge. God, there is a very real enemy out there who wants us outside the gates. There's a very real enemy, God, that is preventing so many people from experiencing the goodness and awesomeness of what is inside your refuge, God, that you are our high priest. You have died to set us free. God, I pray that in our freedom, in your name, we would want others to experience the gloriousness of your salvation. God, that you have made all things worth it, that we would be willing in this temporary time on earth to suffer for your sake, that we would be willing to be embarrassed for your name, that we would be willing to be criticized by the world to proclaim your name to a world that needs it, God. I pray for a revival. I pray that you would bring a new generation of people who are passionate followers of you. God, that we would be people who are not just in your gates, but are calling others to join us, God. Let us ignore the enemy. Let us work to break the strongholds that prevent people from entering into your gates. God, we thank you that you are Lord of all, that you are the only way, the only truth, and the only life, God. And we would want others to know you and to love you and to surrender to your way. In your precious and holy name, amen.